Patrick Jane solved every single case that was ever handed to him, and he even caught the most dangerous serial killer in California with his bare hands. However, there was one mystery he couldn't solve that Red John has left behind. So today I'll go over everything we know about the case of Christina Frye. Before we get into the one thing Patrick Jane never figured out, I have to talk about how ridiculous his record actually is. Across 7 seasons and over 150 episodes, every case that landed on Teresa's desk got closed one way or another, and most of them got closed because Jane walked into a room and read every story in seconds. He was raised in a carnival by a father who used him as a machine for reading marks, so by the time he showed up in the bureau, he already knows exactly how people leak information without meaning to. He uses cold reading on suspects and on corpses. He uses hypnosis when nobody is watching too closely. He stores entire case files in what he calls his memory palace, and he builds these long theatrical traps where the guilty person basically walks into it on their own. Think about the seance he pulls in season 1, where he has Cho and Rigsby sitting in a van doing sound effects while a woman confesses to running over her own mother. It's truly incredible how he solves these cases. He beat a serial killer who ran an entire secret organization of corrupt cops for decades, which is a level of difficulty most detectives could never come to. So when I tell you there is one room he walked out of with nothing, you should understand how rare that actually is. There's one case where Jane basically admits he cannot win, and I have to mention it before Christina because it shows you exactly how his brain works when the normal method fails. In Blinking Red Light, the team catches a murder that belongs to the San Joaquin killer, and Jane figures out very early that the crime blogger obsessing over the case is the killer himself. James Panzer built a whole website about the first victim, he inserted himself into the investigation, he played the grieving obsessive perfectly, and he had fake alibis lined up for the murders. Jane knew he did it, he just could not prove any of it, and Panzer was too careful and too self-controlled to fall for the usual traps. So Jane does something quite dark, actually. He goes on Karen Cross's television show with Panzer, and he steers the conversation until Panzer is bragging, until Panzer calls Red John a sociopath who is lazy and sloppy and delusional. Jane knew exactly what happens to people who insult Red John on television, because it already happened to his own family. Panzer turns up dead in an alley that same night with the smiley face painted on the wall above him. Jane used a serial killer as a murder weapon and let it happen. And to be fair, that is one of the coldest things he ever does in the entire show. He still got his answer though, and that is the point. Even when the system failed him, he found a way and closed the case, which is why the Christina Frye situation stands out so much. Christina Frye shows up in season 1, and she is set up as the one person in the world who annoys Jane on a personal level. She runs a place called the Temple of Harmony, she calls herself a spiritual advisor, and she charges around $3,000 a week to one wealthy client who is seeing her 5 or 6 times a week. That client, Rosemary Tennant, ends up dead, and Christina had literally warned her about it right before it happened. Jane spends the whole episode trying to expose her as a fraud because he was that exact kind of fraud for years, and he knows every trick in the book. The problem is that she keeps being very helpful. She tells them the murder car is sitting in a large body of water, and they pull it out of a reservoir. She tells Jane's story back to him, and he has to brush it off by saying his tragedy is easy to research because it's a famous story. So he never proves she is fake, and she never proves she is real. And the episode ends with her cornering him in an empty interview room. She tells him she made contact with his wife and that his daughter Charlotte was killed in her sleep, that she never woke up and was never afraid for a second. Then she leaves, and Jane sits there and cries, and Van Pelt quietly shuts the door so nobody sees him. Whether she made that up or genuinely believes she heard it from his family, she at least handed him a piece of comfort he had been begging the universe for, and he could not do anything with it except break. That single scene is why everything that happens to Christina later hits as hard as it does. However, this is just the beginning of her tragic story. She comes back at the very end of season 2 in Red Letter and Red Sky in the morning, and this time, Jane is different around her. He still teases her, he still pokes her about the psychic thing, but the arrogance is mostly gone, and he asks her to get coffee. That turns into a date at an Italian restaurant, which is the first date he has been on since his wife died, and you can see how badly it messes with him because he goes to the bathroom and stands there twisting his wedding ring. Then the call comes in that Red John has struck again, and everything falls apart from there. Christina comes to the office and offers to work the case, and Jane goes straight to Hightower and says he will quit if she is allowed anywhere near it because Red John is his. She accepts that pretty easily, and then she goes on live television and speaks directly to Red John, asking him to reach out out and get help, telling the audience he can change. Jane sees the interview on a bar TV and literally runs out of the room because he did the exact same thing years earlier and it cost him his wife and daughter. And we know from the Panzer case that you never talk about Red John on TV. Jane screams at her in the office, and it's awesome we get to see Jane so passionate. However, she tells him the difference is that he was lying and she means it. And of course, that night, Red John kills the woman who interviewed her. Jane was right about not talking about Red John on live TV. After they try to keep Christina's house secure, she simply vanishes from her home. It's crazy that Red John could kidnap her in a house full of cops. And here is where the mystery begins. At first, the team genuinely cannot tell whether she ran or whether she was taken since there was no sign of any struggle, but Jane is the one who refuses to rule out Red John. Then, in the Season 2 finale, Red John gets Jane taped to a chair in a warehouse, leans into his face, and recites the famous Tiger Tiger poem. However, right before he leaves, he tells Jane that Christina sends her love. That is Red John, telling Jane he has her. She stays missing through the season. Then, in the blood on his hands, the FBI agent working her missing persons case calls Jane with a lead, because a phone call with Christina's voice on it got traced to a house. They raid it, and the place is empty, and what they find inside is a Raggedy Ann doll shoved under a cot on the floor, with Red John's smiley face painted on the wall above it, a children's doll, and a serial killer's signature. Everything about this scene was so creepy to me. Jane immediately tells Teresa to let the FBI keep the case, because he knows that the whole thing is a game, and they are being moved around the board. Then, unexpectedly, the visualized cult leader, Brett Stiles, tells Jane he knows where she is. He hands him a piece of paper with an address on it, and here is where everything goes wrong. The team goes into that house with guns up, and the house is empty except for one room, and Christina Frye is sitting in it. She is alive, thankfully. She is not tied up. She is not visibly injured. She is not screaming or crying or reacting to armed people bursting through the door. She just sits there and stares at whatever is in front of her, and nothing anyone says gets a response out of her. So Jane, the man who has spent the entire series mocking the idea of contacting the dead, lights a candle and holds a seance for a woman who is sitting right in front of him and breathing. And surprisingly, she answers. She talks to him calmly and pleasantly, and she tells him the afterlife is wonderful. When he asks her how she died, she says she cannot remember and that it does not matter to her anymore because that part of her life feels unimportant now. When he asks whether she knows what Red John looks like, she genuinely does not understand the question. Jane pushes a little more, but he gets nothing, and then he blows out the candle and leaves. That is literally the last time Christina Frye appears in The Mentalist. She's never mentioned again in any meaningful way. Not when Jane has Lorelei Martins in an interrogation room, not when he has McAllister dying in a park offering to answer questions. So much of Red John material after this, and nobody ever brings her up again. So what actually happened in that house, and why did the greatest mentalist ever just give up? The fans have been dropping takes on this for over a decade, and there are basically 4 theories. The first one is the simplest, which is that Red John hypnotized her into believing she was dead, and Jane could not find the trigger to break it. People push back on that with the fact that Jane snaps people out of trances constantly throughout the show, so why not here? The second theory says she was never hypnotized at all, that she was tortured and broken until her mind shut down, and the calm psychic talk was the only script her brain had left to run. The third one is the conspiracy version, which doesn't make much sense to me. Basically, the idea is that Christina was a con artist the entire time, working for Red John, because look at the pattern. She charged enormous fees, she got written into multiple clients' wills, she backed off the Red John case the moment Jane asked her to, and she is one of the only people who ever crossed Red John and lived. If that was the case, the catatonia is a performance designed to break Jane's head open. And the fourth theory is the boring one, which is that Bruno Heller wrote a great scene without an ending attached to it and quietly dropped the character. There is real evidence for that, since he has admitted he had not even decided who Red John was until around season 4, but there is one explanation that fits every single detail on screen, and it is the one I think is most plausible. Here's what I think, working backwards from the state we actually see her in. Red John never had to invent a new belief for Christina because she already carried the perfect one, and that is the entire trick. She built her whole life and income on the idea that the dead stay conscious, that they move on somewhere better, and that earthly details stop mattering once you cross over. All he had to do was convince her that she had already crossed. That is why she is so calm, and it is why her answers stay so internally consistent, because she is following her own framework perfectly, and every response she gives fits it exactly. The Raggedy Ann doll under the cot tells you the rest, since that is a child's comfort object in a room where a grown woman was held, which points to long isolation and a person regressed until she would accept whatever she was told. And let's not forget that Red John was a member of a brainwashing cult called Visualize, whose people are trained in exactly this kind of conditioning, and he had the time and the manpower to do it properly. Jane could not undo it because there was no simple trigger phrase sitting in her head. The belief was welded to her existing identity, and to break it, he would have had to convince her that everything she had built her life on was false, while she was calm and content and had zero motivation to come back. A person who believes she is already dead has no reason to eat or sleep or speak or ask for help, which means the only realistic place she goes after that room is a locked facility for the rest of her life. Red John found the one way to erase a woman while leaving her body sitting in a chair for Jane to find. And apart from obvious murders, that is the cruelest thing he ever did to anyone in this show. So, tell me what you think actually happened. Jane never solved this mystery and never chased after it. He didn't know what actually happened, and neither do we, but we can theorize. Comment down below your theories and I'll catch you guys in the next video.